If you've been training consistently, eating reasonably well, and the fat around your waist just isn't shifting, or it shifts and comes straight back, you're not doing anything wrong. You're just missing something specific. And in this video, I'm going to tell you what it is, because it took me longer than I'd like to admit to figure it out myself. So in this video, I'm going to show you why the fat around your waist is often the last thing to shift, the 3 things I changed that finally moved it, and how to put them together so you're not still dealing with the same problem 6 months from now. Because I've been a personal trainer for 11 years and trained myself for over 14 years now. And the clearest way I can show you what I actually mean starts with the thing I kept getting wrong for years. And to explain what I mean by missing something, I need to tell you about a period where I was doing everything right, on paper at least, and the fat around my waist still wasn't moving the way I expected it to. I was training consistently, like a lot of people do, 3 sessions a week, full body, progressive overloads, tracked every session, and I was eating well as well, or at least I thought I was. I was eating clean. Decent breakfasts, reasonable lunches, sensible dinners, all of that stuff. Most of the time anyway. And the rest of my body was leaning out, my face, my arms, my chest. It was all responding how I wanted it to for the most part. But the midsection, the bit around the lower belly specifically, and the sides as well, it wasn't really moving. And I went through the same thing most people go through at this point, and what most of my clients say when they first come on board. I convinced myself I needed to train harder, add more sessions, try different exercises, try doing loads of ab work, but none of it made a meaningful difference. And here's what I finally worked out, and it was slightly embarrassing once I saw it clearly. The training wasn't the problem. The issue was 3 things happening quietly in the background that I hadn't addressed properly. And once I sorted all 3, the fat around my waist finally started shifting in a way it hadn't done in months before. By the way, the training structure I'm talking about is built into the Softer Lean program in the description. 3 full body sessions per week, progressive overload built in, and it's completely free. Link below. Okay, so here's what was actually going on. And I'd almost bet at least one of these is happening for you right now. So the first thing was the deficit wasn't real. I thought I was eating in a deficit, and Monday to Thursday I genuinely was. I was eating really well. But the weekends were definitely undoing everything that I'd built through the week. So for example, I had restaurant meals that were bigger than I thought, a few drinks on the weekend with friends or my wife, and they add up fast, and a lot faster than I thought they would. And then it'd get to Sunday, and it'd always start well, and then it would go a bit sideways by the evening. I'd often have a Sunday dinner, for example, and it didn't really feel like I was overeating. But across the full week, when you added it up, I wasn't actually losing anything. I was roughly breaking even, which meant the scale wasn't moving and the fat around that midsection certainly wasn't either. And the fix was the baseline week. So what that means, and I can almost guarantee that you missed this out, is that before you go into any type of fat loss phase, you want 1 full week of tracking everything. Not completely obsessive, just being as accurate as possible. And the reason is to see exactly what is going in across the full 7 days, including the weekends. And what I found was a gap between what I thought I was eating and what I was actually eating. But once I could see it, I could actually sort it out. And I've seen this play out across multiple clients over the years. For example, my client here was in the exact same position. He'd been into fat loss phases where he'd lose a few pounds, but couldn't really see his abs. Once we actually tracked everything meticulously, just for 1 week, we found that his weekends were completely undoing his deficit. And once we actually implemented a strategy to make sure that didn't happen was when the pounds finally started dropping and he was actually able to see his abs. When it was quite a straightforwardly simple fix, but we had to do the analysis first. And the next thing is almost certainly where a lot of people mess up, and probably you too, and that is sleep and stress, which were working against me. This is the one most people don't think to look at, and the one that made the biggest difference once I actually took it seriously. Because when sleep is poor and stress is high, it is much harder to lose that body fat around the middle. And I'm not going to go and tell you a lot of bro science like cortisol's the reason. It's not. It's more of a correlation as opposed to a causation. Because when it's under pressure, and it's not a willpower thing, as I said, it's just how the body responds. Because if you think about it, naturally, if you have less sleep and your stress is high, what do we need? We need more energy. So what do we do when we need more energy? Well, we go to the cupboards, we go to the fridge, and we end up consuming more calories whether we realize it or not. Therefore, we're more likely to be in a surplus. So I wasn't sleeping badly in an obvious way, but I was consistently getting around 6 hours rather than 7 or 8. And my stress levels from work were higher than they usually were. And these were small things on their own, but together they were making it way harder for that fat around my waist to shift, regardless of what I was doing in the gym. And the fix wasn't complicated. I made sure I was getting to bed earlier. I ended up cutting caffeine out completely in the day, so I wasn't wrecking the sleep quality. I was walking more to manage stress rather than than just training harder, and none of it felt like much individually, but the accumulative effect within a few weeks was definitely noticeable. And that leads on to the third thing, which tied the other two together. And that third thing was protein wasn't consistent enough. I was hitting my protein target most days, but most days isn't every day. And the days I missed it, usually the weekends, usually when the routine was disrupted for whatever reason, were the same days the deficit completely disappeared and ended up being maintenance or a surplus, as I mentioned before. And the two problems were more connected than I'd realised. But when protein is consistently hit at every meal, hunger is much more manageable, cravings are lower, and the weekend overconsumption, which is quietly undoing the deficit, becomes much easier to manage and keep in check. And protein wasn't the only fix, but sorting it consistently made the deficit much easier to maintain and the sleep situation much easier to manage because I wasn't arriving at the evening running on empty and making worse decisions for it. So Cash here is the client who showed me most clearly that these three things work together, and then it's almost never just one of them on its own. So he came to me genuinely frustrated, late 30s, demanding job, training consistently, eating what he thought was well, and the fat around his midsection wasn't shifting. And he was starting to think it just wasn't going to happen, especially that he was turning 40 later in the year and he had a goal to see his abs. But when we actually sat down and looked at the full week, his assessment week, the baseline week, it became much more obvious pretty quickly. His weekday eating was pretty good actually, like a lot of people's are, but the weekends were where everything completely slipped. His sleep was consistently under 7 hours because of job, the kids, and his protein targets were never getting hit because the routine changed. So three problems, and they were all connected, and they were all working against him at the same time. We sorted his weekend eating first, and we didn't restrict everything massively. We just had a clearer picture of what was actually going in. So we made sure his calories were between a certain range, and we allowed him to have a little bit more calories on the weekend, but they were all factored into the weekly average. And then the next step is we locked in the protein across all 7 days, not just the 5 days. And then we worked on the sleep basics. Earlier bedtime, caffeine cut off by around midday, and within 12 weeks, as you can see on the photo, he was able to see his abs for the first time before he turned 40. So he actually hit his goal. And it wasn't because we changed anything in his training, in fact. It was because we fixed the three things the training definitely couldn't overcome on its own. And if you want the full structure that makes all of this work, the Softer Lean program in the description has it completely mapped out from day one. It's completely free in the description. All right, so here's how to apply all of this, and here's the practical version. Because knowing what the three things are is one thing, but actually fixing them is another. Start with the assessment week or baseline week, because before changing anything, one honest week of tracking calories across a full 7 days is an absolute game changer. And it's not to just completely judge what you find, it's just to see it so we know what is happening. And the gap between what you think you're eating and what you're actually eating is almost always the answer. And once you've got the baseline, you've got the assessment week done, the next thing is to sort the protein across all 7 days, not just the weekdays when you're at work and the routine is a lot more manageable. And take the sleep side seriously rather than just treating it as irrelevant. 7 hours consistently, caffeine off ideally by the afternoon, more walking and more steps when stress is high rather than just trying to train more makes such a difference. And small adjustments individually, but together they make losing fat around that midsection in particular much more responsive. And you're probably thinking, well, why is the midsection always last to go? And as we know, we can't pinpoint specific areas to lose fat from as opposed to others, but for the majority of lads I've found over the years, especially with my clients, is that the midsection is the last to go. So what I'm really saying, once you get lighter, you just need to be much more careful of your calorie intake and these other variables like your sleep, like your protein tracking and your stress. Because once they're sorted, it's much easier to make sure that all areas are being ticked, all the checkboxes are being ticked, meaning you can be in a deficit easier, and I can guarantee you will start to see the body fat drop. And the fat around your waist isn't there because something is fundamentally wrong. It's there because one or more of these three things hasn't been addressed. And the training alone can't overcome all three at once. But here's what most people then find once the fat starts shifting from the lower belly and the midsection in general. And this catches almost everyone off guard at the same specific point, even once the fat is moving and the progress is visible. There's a phase where it slows right down and it feels like it's stopped completely, even though it hasn't. Some people call this a plateau, and most people change something at exactly the wrong moment. But understanding what's actually happening at that point is what separates the people who get all the way there from the people who get close and then just go in this never-ending circle of putting on weight and losing weight, putting on weight, etc. And I've got a video that covers exactly what that is somewhere over here, so watch it next.